hear her. So give a warm welcome for Cyndi.
Can you hear me, Mike? Yes. Good. Sometimes I don't need a mic at all. My name's Cyndi Masters. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Cyndi.
Because of the grace of God, some simple actions in this program and both sides of sponsorship, I've been sober every single day in a row since December the 17th, 1985. That's my miracle. Because of that, and because that's the biggest deal in my life, I have this amazing life. I have two home groups. One's an online home group. We don't have voting privileges as online home groups, so I also have an in-person home group. My online home group is the Great Facts Meeting. There's over a dozen people here that I met on the Great Facts Meeting. I chaired Tuesday nights for a couple of years and got speakers. There's my tribe sitting over there. They're Michigan, North Carolina, and Florida. And afterwards, those of you that participate in the Great Facts Meeting, we'd like to get a picture when this is over, just so we can put it on our private Facebook page. So private Facebook page. Woo, that social media is scary. So anyway, and I'll talk about that hopefully if I get time, but it saved my life being in that meeting during COVID, because it was just quite an adjustment. What makes me an alcoholic and what qualifies me to be in this program is that when I drink, I can't tell you how much I'm going to drink, and I can't tell you how I'm going to behave. Now, what I want to recall are the few times that I did, and then a few days later, it was off and running. You know, that's what I want to recall. But in the doctor's opinion, it says that the average temperate drinker never, not only once in a while, never can't control their drinking. And I almost always couldn't control my drinking from the beginning. I've been drinking since I was this big. And I drank for exactly what it talks about in the textbook of Alcoholics Anonymous. I drank for the effect produced by alcohol. And what that meant to me was not tall or pretty or any of that. See, I felt like I was bleeding from the inside out. I hurt all the time and I didn't know what to do with it. And when I drank, it cauterized that bleeding. And that's what drinking did for me, and I believe it saved my life. I still tried to kill myself a lot, but I'm pretty sure I would have been successful, not just in the hospital and with tubes in me and that kind of thing. I think that alcohol just gave me enough relief that I could tolerate life. I got here originally in 1980. My sobriety date is 1985. In the foreword to the second edition, it talks about people like me. It says 50% of us that come and really try take some time to get sober. I'm one of those people. It took me time to completely surrender to my innermost self that I'm alcoholic. It did not take me time to admit I was alcoholic in my life, that I was powerless over alcohol, my life was unmanageable, but completely surrendering was a different thing for me. By the time I got here in 1980, I don't remember my last drunk, but it was told to me. I'd already been in over 24 institutions. I lived in state mental hospitals and jails and foster homes. I was adopted originally and I went back to orphanages. I'd hitchhiked from one end of this country to another. I didn't have a home, I didn't have a dream, I didn't have anything I was going to grow up and be. I was done. I was drinking to blot out my existence. Home base was Cincinnati. I was mostly living in DC on the streets doing what a young girl does to make it on the streets. I didn't go to high school, except when I was in an institution. Half the time it was special education, and then I would get in a foster home and they put me in advanced classes. And you know, I was angry. I've never seen anybody come in quite as angry as I was. I was angry and hopeless. Here's the truth for me, and this is not true for everybody. I was going to be hopeless with or without alcoholism. That's my truth. Some people, they have hope, alcoholism catches up with them, and then they reclaim a life. I didn't have a life to reclaim. Drinking was my salvation. I had alcoholic poisoning a bunch of times. You know, I got here on 7 felonies. I don't think I intended to do the bad things that caused the felonies. I always was a pretty well-intended person, you know what I mean? But I carried a gun. Most scared people do. And I'm a blackout drinker. So who knows? Once I drink, it's on, and apparently somebody was trying to get away from me. Can you imagine I'm waving a gun, they're trying to get away from me? And they run into a retail store. I don't blame them. They thought I wouldn't go in there with my gun. A sane person wouldn't. I imagine I was scary, so they called the popo. Apparently I tried to wrestle with them. Here's what I remember. So that's relayed to me, right? I have no recollection. What I remember is I woke up in University Hospital. I'm hanging on a wall on a stretcher. I'm tied down from head to toe. I'm black and blue from my chin to my knees. And I look down and I'm like, who did this to me? Because see, I'm a victim, and all I can ever see, I can never see my role, right? All I can see is what the world's done, and I've got all kinds of reinforcement for this, you know, because I've had this poor little life. And so everybody's happy to jump into my victim bandwagon with me, you know? It's like, poor kid, right? But this nurse didn't say that. She said, Cyndi, you did. She said, you're an alcoholic. The county sheriff's on his way to get you. By the way, I was barely 17 years old. She said, the county sheriff's on his way to get you and you're not going to juvenile. And this was 1980, this was not common. She said, and so what had happened was, see, I had burned out the system. Every time they put you someplace, somebody tries to help you. But I was so angry that I not only couldn't accept the help, I disrupted everybody else's opportunity to get help, right? The only other time I was told I was an alcoholic, I lived in a foster home, and it's actually what got me back here to have that event, because my foster brother and sister had muscular dystrophy. And in that foster home, it was the first place that I felt valued. I helped put the kids to bed, you know? They loved me. My foster mom let me drink once the kids went to bed, and we would drink and play chess. And she would tell me that I was an alcoholic, and she probably was too, but never go to AA. Because they're going to try to make you believe in God, and just look at my kids. So I'd hitchhike back from DC to be there for his surgery, is how I was even in Cincinnati when it's happening. So they took me to the county jail. It was called a workhouse at the time. And I went into alcoholic seizures. That's my good news. See, I always have consequences. And I always have, like, I've drank so long and so hard and on the streets that there's physical consequences. And because of that, I always get opportunities. And just like the speaker said last night, there's always a gift in every tragedy that's ever happened in my life. But I had to get rid of the anger and the resentment enough to be able to see where those gifts were. I had to be able to do enough work that I could reach back and see what good came from everything. I somehow got in front of a judge and went to treatment. And I was with a bunch of old boys. This is 1980. And I was in the country because there wasn't nothing available in the city. And I was like this, and my vocabulary was a bunch of profanity. And see, I wore it like a shield. You know, I would put all that bravado on, that street bravado that kept me safe in institutions and kept me safe on the streets, because it was my security. And inside there was probably a little scared girl, but I couldn't touch her. I couldn't see her, and you couldn't see her. And see, what happened was these people from AA, and the speaker said this last night too, but we don't shoot our wounded. We don't shoot our wounded here. And I was so wounded I couldn't behave the way society wanted me to, certainly couldn't behave the way you wanted me to. I just came and showed up, and they said, Cyndi, if you'll work those steps, your life can be different. And I said, and I meant it with everything I mean, I wish that were true. I wish your little steps could fix all my big problems. But see, you don't understand. See, I'm broken. And that's how I saw myself. I was shattered inside. I'm so broken. So I wouldn't try your steps. Because see, I'd already been through everything, and if I tried your steps and they didn't work, it proved everything everybody had ever said about me right. And so I left there and I hung out in Alcoholics Anonymous, which is perhaps the most miserable experience in the world. It's worse than drinking, and it's just because I vibrate without a drink, you know what I mean? Like with no solution and no drink, you know, it's not fun. So I hung out long enough to kind of find a couple fellas to go break the law with and drink. And I always get caught. And I got to go to a halfway house in Lexington, Kentucky. The other thing was my probation officer. I've been around AA 6 months. I'm still 17 years old. I've never driven a car I didn't steal. I don't have a driver's license. Nobody to sign for it. I don't have nothing. She said, you have to become an emancipated adult. You've been living like one, you gotta be emancipated. So I went to this halfway house. I was the youngest person there, and they didn't care. And they didn't care about my poor, pitiful life. They said, show up early at Alcoholics Anonymous and help make coffee. You know what happens at this place I don't feel like I fit? If you felt like you didn't fit this weekend, get a service job. Because when I make coffee, you know what happens? People start to know who I am. And I feel important, you know. And what's more important to a newcomer than somebody remembering their name? Nothing. Just nothing, right? And you did. And so I was a part of because I participated. So I learned that in that halfway house. And then they said, Cyndi, you got to get a JOB. You just heard my resume. I got no identification. I do not have an ID. How am I going to get a job? Well, I was in Lexington, Kentucky. It was only halfway house for women in the Midwest. I got a job setting tobacco in the fields. Now that's hard work. But guess what happened? I got my own money. And I stopped manipulating men in Alcoholics Anonymous to buy my pie when we went out afterwards. I stopped manipulating you, and when I stopped doing that, you know what happened? My shoulders started to go back. My chin started to go up. It is only by moving my feet. I had all these probation officers. I had all of these shrinks and therapists and all these people, you know. I had, you know, the foster home people. I had all of those people, and I kept waiting for somebody to give me the recipe to feel better so I could act better. And you taught me the secret recipe. Acting better made me feel better. And that felt so not right. Not to mention that I felt that the people that broke me should fix me. You know, I didn't feel like I should have to do all the work for something somebody else did. I was so mad and so blaming. And they had me go through, and I did my best with the steps, and they said, Cyndi, you got to get your GED. I said, GED, man, that's for losers. That's for people that didn't go to high school. See, I thought if I got a GED, you might know, but really here's the truth. I thought that I wouldn't be able to do it because I didn't go to high school. I didn't know stuff, and they said, go take these classes, this test to see where you are in the classes. And I took that test, and guess what? I didn't have to take any classes. I took the test, and I scored in the top 2% of anybody that had ever taken that test at that point. Now, it was in Kentucky, mind you. But that very test that I was like, for losers, all of a sudden I'm like, look at me, I'm Cyndi, I got a GED, baby. And see, that's how I am. I reject you or it if I don't think I can do it. If I think you're not going to like me, I just don't like you first. You know, because I'm scared. But see, I didn't think I had any fears. There were no fears on my first inventory because I was tough. I'd faced everything. I went in, you know, I was just a scared little girl. And that was the hardest thing to come to terms with. I knew I was bad, but all that fear stuff and how you could affect me, that took a long time to digest. Thank God we get to do these steps over and over because it's had to happen in layers for me. So I left there, I became an AA wonder girl in Cincinnati. And you know, when you come from a really low bottom, everybody's like, all you got to do is talk in complete sentences and people are proud. You know, it's like, you know what I mean? And it's like, I'm giving, and so I went and I'm trying to make amends. Now understand, I would not approve of the way I did the steps back then. But I did the best I could. And what I believe is God gives us grace as long as we do the best we can. And the best I can is different than the best you can. Because we all come from different places. You know, and I was doing the best I could, and so I got some grace. And so I went and made amends to the Muscular Dystrophy Association, you know, that thing somebody was talking about, and, you know, because I borrowed some money from a fundraiser that you shouldn't do, and I was willing to go to jail. And, you know, instead what happened? I did some volunteer work, and then they gave me a job as the youngest national employee they'd ever had, and I became the executive director for the outlying counties for Cincinnati. I was 20 years old. Oh no, oh no. That's what I thought. Woo, look at me go, right? I was so not ready for that job. I had no ability to handle that job. I didn't even know how to pay my bills on time yet. You know, I was still bouncing checks. I still kept a small warrant on myself most of the time so that I could go home. You know, it's like, so I took my business cards and I went to the Oak Street, which is the clubhouse I got sober in, and I passed them out and I said, you work the steps, you too can get a secretary, new car, and a business card. And inside I hid from my secretary, and I knew they were going to discover that they hired the wrong person, and I got more and more afraid. See, there are two things we have to do to get sober. We have to concede to our innermost self 100%, and we have to have the capacity to be honest. And so what does that mean to me? Today it means that I'm transparent and authentic. And I wasn't. I came to AA and showboated. Because see, I have to be more to be enough. I have to have a little better car so it's good enough for you to ride in. I have to have a little better house so it's good enough for you to come in. You know, because just being like you isn't enough for me. And so I had to have a little better job so I was good enough to talk to you about work. I've never thought I was better than anybody. I'm not. And I got drunk going to AA meetings. You can get drunk going to AA meetings. It is by applying the solution to our lives, and a far better example lies in our daily lives. And I did what we do. I tried to come back to AA the next day. I woke up drunk, don't remember drinking. And I went to the meeting and I said, I'm back and I want to be sober. And then I left that meeting and guess what I did? I went and bought a bottle of booze. And this went on for almost a year, except towards the end of the year I didn't try to come back to AA anymore. There was no bravado, there were no jails, maybe one psych unit. You know, the car got repossessed, you lose a job, you get a job, you stay with somebody, they stay with you. My drinking life became normal and the people I hung out with were just like me. My last drunk was December the 16th, 1985, and it was pitiful. It wasn't exciting. See, alcoholism is not exciting. And our consequences are not our alcoholism. So all that jail stuff and felonies and all that, that has nothing to do with alcoholism. I do a lot of service work in the prisons, and there are people there that are not alcoholic that have done a lot of bad things. So it's not those things that make me alcoholic, it's the way I drink and it's what it does to me that makes me alcoholic. And so what happened was I'm coming out of a blackout, and as a blackout drinker with my background, I have woke up in some of the most traumatic situations and had no idea how I got there. And so coming out of a blackout is not just, it's terror. And so this street broad, tough, I'm sitting and I am a puking, peeing drunk. I'm not proud of that. But I pee on myself and why do I say this from the podium? Because I need to not make alcoholism something that it's not. If I die from alcoholism, it won't be some bravado thing, it'll be drowning in the toilet. You know, that's my truth. So I've peed on myself, I've urinated on myself, I'm scared to death, how do I get home? Because that's always the first thing, how do I get home? I'm sitting in front of where I live. That's pitiful, incomprehensible, demoralization. And the next day I woke up and it was all different. What I mean by different is I had a level of humility I'd not had before. I seceded to my innermost self that that was as good as it could get. If I continued to drink, it could never be better than sitting in front of where I live, being afraid about how to get home. It could never be better than that. And for me, that's what it is. It's just that I can never drink successfully because I think I had a lurking notion in the back of my mind that somehow, someday, if I got emotionally stable, if I had some money, if I had a car, if I had things that other people have, maybe, just maybe, I could drink like other people. Well, I can't. I can't. And I needed that drunk, honestly, for me, to finally do that real concession. I asked someone to sponsor me that didn't. See, I was Big Book Cyndi. I memorized the Big Book and I quoted it a lot. Especially when an old timer misquoted it. Popular I was. So I got a sponsor that didn't know about the Big Book the way I did, and she didn't know about the Oxford group, and, she'd never heard of For Sinners Only, and, I'm like, but here's what she did do. She got sober, got married, had a couple kids. I watched this happen and was happy. I thought she was going to be so proud to be my sponsor. And the first thing she said is, I'll sponsor you, but here's some conditions. 1, you may not quote the Big Book anymore. You may only paraphrase as it applies in your life. Because see, I knew it, but I didn't know it. And I still try to only paraphrase. Because knowledge doesn't mean anything here. But how do I put that on what happens in my life? And hopefully I got enough time to tell you how I've done that. The next thing that she did is we looked at the first step differently than I've ever looked at it. Powerlessness, unmanageable, easy peasy. I've never had power over alcohol. I blacked out on my first drink when I was a little kid. I'm a blackout drinker. I'm a drinker that the drink takes me. I drank round the clock living on the streets. I did everything I could to blot out my existence. There were only 3 or 4 times in periods of time I tried to control it. One was after I was sober the first time. I can't. She said, I want you to go deeper than that. And this is not the book, this is my experience. She said, what's the probable consequences if you drink again? I said, what we say. I'll go to jail, a mental hospital, or I'll die, right? You know what she did? She laughed at me. She said, you're not afraid of any of that. And see, that's the truth. I grew up in jail. I'm so good there. I am. I'm like pretty much a vice president, If you've ever been in a state mental hospital in the 70s, the bar is very low. Being successful there is easy. See, here's what I had to come to in death, man. That's like the next adventure. I've ridden a Harley Davidson my entire recovery. That's not somebody afraid of dying. Just look at the statistics. And this was important to me, and it still motivates me to be right in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous no matter how busy my life gets. The worst thing that happens to me is I drink and live. For like 20 years. Because see, here's what I am. The truth is, and I learned this through working the steps, when I drink, I'm a black hole. And I suck the life out of anybody that gets near me. And the worst thing is I lie to myself and I think I'm giving and loving. But I'm really not. And I hurt everybody that tries to love me. And then I tell them it's their fault. I don't want to be that. It's not about like me having some consequence. It's about that being my legacy. It's about having a life that wasn't worth living. See, I had enough taste of Alcoholics Anonymous to know that I could have a life worth living. And I want a life worth living. So now it's about how do you put this on a life? Because see, our example is not what happens here, and it says it in our book. Our example's what happens out there. How do we go home? How do we go to our work? How do we do that? And what I do here lets me do that. It lets me do that. Man, has that been hard for me. I didn't get here with any skills. And it has been an evolution, little by slowly. I had this 6-year period I usually talk about. I moved to Louisville from Cincinnati when I was 10 years sober. And that was traumatic because they didn't do AA right. My My sponsor says if you don't feel the spirit of AA in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, ask yourself why you didn't bring it. Ouch. So I started a big book meeting and a fellowship grew up around me. And I have a big book meeting in my house every Wednesday. I haven't through the pandemic because I want you to see how I live. I want to invite you into my home. It's the way they used to do it. I want to be transparent. I want to be authentic. I don't want you to have an idea of me. I want you to know me. I don't want to just have you hear what I say in the meeting. I want you to watch how I really live. How do I move my feet? My grandmother died when I was 11 years sober. It broke my heart a million pieces. She was my person that told me what you told me. She said, Cyndi, God loves you, period. And everybody loved her. She never judged me. She was always kind, and I didn't have very many of those people. And when I was sober, I'd go visit her, and I'd do intimacy. She'd wash my face before I went to bed. I'd snuggle into bed with her in my 20s. I could be vulnerable with her, and that's not my strong suit. So she died, and you die. That's part of life. But she was terrified when she died, and I got mad at God. I said, how can you take this lady that's been terrified, that's been your servant her whole life, done nothing but be good to all your people, and let her be afraid to come meet you? And I took a walk in the dark sober at 11 years. And I almost blew my brains apart. And I did two things right. See, we've got a partner in this deal. We get a lot of grace, but we got to do some right things. And the two things that I did right, I was mad at God. Mad. But I went to meetings and I didn't pretend. I didn't go in with my 11-year sober persona of wall-to-wall peaches and cream. I went to meetings and cried and said, I can't feel God, which is very humbling when you're speaking all over the country, you know, and you got this image. The image will kill any of us. Forget your image. Don't believe your press inside Alcoholics Anonymous. Just be real. And I cried. And so because of that, I believe that capacity to be honest and that I continued to look for God. Now, when I was early in recovery and they wanted me to meditate, I vibrated. I still do. I move my leg a lot. I got all this untreated ADD, and if I move my leg, it lets me think. And so anyway, they said meditate. Well, I smoked and vibrated, and I don't know about you. I don't just got a committee. I got a firing squad. You know what I mean? It's like, oh my God, sitting still, whoo, worst thing ever. And so I got this Harley Davidson that vibrated more than I did, and I had long fishtail pipes that were straight, and it's like, woo, my first meditation tool. Because see, here's the deal. God will meet me where I am. I don't have to go where you go to find God. That's a beautiful thing in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's different than any other spiritual society. You get to choose what, and see, here's my thing. I can't define God. The big book says God's infinite. I'm finite. How could I define God? But I feel God, and I felt God the first time in the wind. So I got on that motorcycle. It's February 1, 1998. I'm 12 years sober now, and I get on Interstate 65 in Louisville, and I'm doing about 70 miles an hour, and kaboom, I get hit. According to police report, I'm catapulted 17 foot in the air. That's what happened with 70 miles an hour and 70 miles an hour meet. And I came down, I landed on the car riding down the center lane of the highway. Can you imagine that, lady? I rolled off that car and that car drove up me. I've had more than 24 surgeries on this side of my face from the undercarriage shred in my face. I didn't have one since then until this year, and it's failed so far because my face is contracting. I had a really cool spiritual experience on the highway. I didn't know what happened, but my lungs got collapsed. My ribs went through my lungs when that car drove over me, and I can't breathe. And when you can't breathe, you're dying, and I got really afraid, probably like my grandma. And I always say this, so if you heard it, I'm sorry. I don't always say a lot of things, but I always say this. We're afraid to change home groups. Of course we're afraid of the big adventure, you know? And so I got really afraid, and then I let go absolutely. And I got embraced by nothing but white, billowy clouds of love. How lucky am I? Now, this was not without a lot of consequences. I have a traumatic brain injury. That was probably the worst thing. I have a spinal cord injury. I have a million things that were wrong with me. I don't have a family to take care of me. You guys did. They made new regulations. I was in a sober motorcycle club in Cincinnati. I was the only girl. They invited me, which is, my little name was Master Blaster. But it was the 5th chapter, some of you may remember it. But anyway, from Cincinnati, those old bikers came and laid on my couch. I had seizures. I lost my looks. I looked like this. Little kids were afraid of me. That big brain that could memorize the big book, I couldn't remember your name 10 minutes after I met you. I had a business and I lost it and everything I owned. So making money was out of the equation. They fast-tracked me and put me on Social Security, disability, and food stamps. What's going to become of me? This is me at 12 years sober. What's going to come of me? You know what y'all did? You brought me new girls, and they'd come to my house, and they'd be feeling sorry for themselves. They wouldn't want to tell me once they saw me, but they talk them into it, and new girl would be like, well, my boyfriend left. I don't know how I'm going to go on. I'd have a seizure. She would feel better. Now, I don't know nothing because I can't remember her name anymore. But what I know is when people come to my house, they feel kind of sad. And when they leave my house, they are happy. And I'm feeling a little bit like Gandhi here. Now, what did I do right? See, we got to do parts right. What did I do right? I let it be enough. I let it be enough. I let being my most spiritually useful self be having a seizure, and I didn't demand that it look different from God. So I want to be on a mountaintop, right? I let having a seizure make me have value. Because see, as alcoholics, this is what we get here. We don't have to worry when we retire. We got purpose right here. And as long as I can help somebody else, my life has value and is worth living. No matter what else is wrong with me. And so even if it's just having a seizure, but people wanted to come see me, and people took me to all my clinics. People, I was in the hospital for months, and then they took me to all my clinics. This 6-year period of time, I followed that up with stage 3 breast cancer. And I ended up doing a year of chemo and radiation. Guess who took care of me again? Y'all. You didn't get worn out. I don't know why or how. Some people come to me and they say, man, I got sick and nobody in AA did that. But I will tell you this, I was in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous. I wasn't on the outskirts. I was in the middle, and I'm a giver, and I show up. I didn't show up so people would show up for me, but they sure did. And newcomers and I had beautiful experiences because they got to hang out with somebody that had some sobriety and that was really close to God right then. And I got to hang out with people that needed me. Lucky me. So the cancer thing, I got mad at God for one day. Look at this life I've had, man. All these institutions, all the blah, 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 the streets, all the, you know what I mean? And I heard back, look at this life you've had. All these things, the first thing kills somebody, and I lived through all of them. How lucky am I? And that's what Alcoholics Anonymous does. It allows us to have a different angle of approach. Life's not wall-to-wall peaches and cream. I live with chronic, debilitating pain every day of my life. And you know how I get out of it? I think about you. And it works. Just what you taught me with my emotional pain works the same for my physical. You gave me every tool I need. So after that, I started falling. And my back had been kicked through doors when I was a kid and been broke. And the wreck exacerbated it. And they had to go do a big deal surgery and cut part of my spinal canal. And it triggered all that old trauma that I thought was over. And I made my last real amends from my first step following that, because my sponsor said it's time to really do some deep forgiveness work. I was not ready till I was 17 years sober. I made a shallow amends. And I made amends to the man that broke my back. Now, I didn't make it for him breaking my back. I made it for what I did with that. I made it for how I tarnished his reputation. I made it for how I blamed him for every pain I had. And then he gave me an opportunity to lock and load on him and share some experiences, because somebody had confronted him about beating me with an extension cord the week before, the week before he'd been confronted from my cousin. And I didn't, because I was free and because I didn't make the amends before I was ready, before I had forgiven. That's why it says become entirely ready. To be entirely ready, I can't be in a place I'm still angry at you. And I can't make that go away. I can only take the steps, and then God removes it. I got to trust God in this process. I just take the steps, and God takes care of the rest. And then for the grand finale of that 6 years, I started a business between cancer and the lower back thing. That's how I remember my life. And nobody thought I was a recipient of the Traumatic Brain Injury Trust Fund. She was helping me organize my bills. I told that lady, I'm starting a business next week. Can you imagine what she thought? And I said, yeah, technology. I had $1,700 to my name because the person that hit me on the bike, they took off. So I didn't have nothing. And anyway, that business today, so don't ever we want to squash people's dreams because we don't want them to hurt or fail. You just don't know what's going to happen. That's a global business today. And I do business around the planet, and that's pretty cool. Not because of me. I can't do a thing it does. I just got really lucky, and I did what you taught me to do, show up, find good people. I found good people that worked without getting paid at first. I don't know, only we can do that. I think people felt sorry for me, but so then I fell through my attic. I had a Victorian house, and I slipped through the rafters, and I landed on my neck in the doorway below, and I was paralyzed from the chest down. Now, all this happened in Louisville, and AA took care of me through every single thing, or I wouldn't tell these stories because it doesn't seem very real, but it's real. And so I learned to walk again 3 times in 6 years. I put my life back together. I didn't, you did, and God did. And I didn't want to live after that because I didn't know if I would get this back. They did a miracle surgery. They removed my C5 vertebrae. I love to show pictures because I'm like Legos, man. And but look at me, I stand and I walk. How blessed am I? This is what I mean by every trauma, every tragedy has a gift in it. Because of the way I grew up, I never thought, oh, I'm going to go to school and then college and have all these things. I never thought that. And so because of that, I was well equipped to have a lot of things happen because that's what I knew. I knew lots of things going wrong, and so I didn't, it wasn't like, oh, how could this happen? I never said, how could this happen to me? Not one time. Because I had you. I was never alone. I was alone my whole life drinking. I was never alone. I did not want to live, and you guys, my friends, they said, you get up. Clearly we did, but I was an idiot. I didn't go to meetings for a long time because I was in the hospital so long and medicated appropriately, because that's what happens when your central nervous system's exposed. But guess what? I'm still an idiot, and so I didn't want to go back to AA. Because that's what happens when we don't go to AA. And they said, who cares? We're picking you up. Shut up and get in the car. Now, understand, I'm 17 years sober now. So I shut up and got in the car, and I'd stand up these people that brought my meals. I got an infection in the wound. They took me to IV antibiotics at 7 in the morning every day, and I get up and tell them how I didn't like it there anymore. And you know what they did? They loved me better. The hardest amends to make are the ones that you have to make sober. The ones that you have to make to people in AA that you really hurt. That's hard. You know, my life is amazing because I always need more F3 businesses today. I'm not capable of any of them. I think God did that so that you could know that everything's possible. I sit on lots of boards, committees for the city, for nonprofits, not AA. And it's easy to think that those things become really important. And they're not. You are. And as long as you and God stay first and second, and I don't know which is first and which is second, because sometimes you got to be first because I can't feel God if I'm not with you. And sometimes God's got to be first because I can't treat you right if I don't talk to God. And, you know, that's where those bumpers on my life of the 11th step make everything okay. You know, if I just really do the night and morning thing with the 11th step, you know, and then still need a repair step for during the day, golly, you know, that 10th step. But, you know, I'm a whole human being. I came here fractured, splintered, broken. My brother was murdered in 2010. My siblings, you know, I was mama's sister. My sister sends me a Mother's Day card. None of us stayed at home past 15, and none of us graduated high school. My parents are very educated, and my dad sits in a position of power. My brother, I loved him so much. When I first got sober, my cousin died, and I was her favorite, and she was mine, and I looked at her in the coffin. She died in childbirth. I felt nothing. So I didn't have any feelings. I was just not a person. I was not a human being when I got here. In that jail, I screamed like an animal. My brother died, and he and I went to Costa Rica. He did good. He had a little crack problem, but he did good. Like, he built houses. He had houses in Atlantic Beach, North Carolina, and he had a house in Costa Rica and a house in Canada. And he tried hard. He's my Irish twin, 9 months apart. And when he was murdered, I cried every day. I got my whole library of feelings back. I'm a whole person. I'm so glad to be able to feel sad. We don't talk about that here. We're like, happy, joyous, and free. Well, guess what? I can't be whole if I don't have some sad and some grief and some of those things too. How blessed am I? Because they don't own me. I was so afraid of all those feelings because they would own me. And they don't. I can feel everything and be still. I can be still. That was the coolest thing that came out of COVID. So I felt institutionalized when COVID first happened. I'm locked in my house. I'm triggered, right? I got PTSD. You can't come from where I come from and not have it. You can't. But guess what? I function. It doesn't own me. It doesn't own me because I know what to do when something happens. And it's all these steps. They just work for just about everything. It's crazy. And so anyway, I'm in my house. Chris from the Great Facts at Founded, he invited me to speak there, and I said, can I please help? Because that's the only way I know to feel better. I never feel better thinking about me. You cannot treat a disease of self-centeredness focusing on self. It simply does not work. And so Chris said, yeah, I got speakers for 3 nights a week. We built that meeting to between 600 and 800 people a night, 7 nights a week. It was amazing, and it saved me because I had a job. And I've met so many amazing people through Zoom. And then I took up Native American flute. I play guitar, but I took up Native American flute because it focuses on breath. And so that's my meditation thing. And so I could spend 2 to 3 hours in the morning because my business has slowed down some. And so I could spend 2 to 3 hours in the morning in meditation and prayer. And I will tell you something, I have never felt anything like that in my life. I'm unfortunately unable to dedicate that kind of time right now. But I play my flute every morning, and I go through the 11th step ritual every morning. But that deep, deep connection with God that happens through time with Him. Time. It was just such a miracle. Such a miracle. And the first thing I had to do was let go of my old ideas. See, I have old ideas of how AA should be. And what it says is we must grow along spiritual lines. Open. Could I have a new experience? And yes, I did. Now, am I back at in-person meetings? Yes, I am. I love hugs. Nothing replaces hugs. But Gus sitting over there went to his very first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting ever on our home group. I sponsored several women who went through all the steps with me and never attended an in-person meeting. And the reason I want to share that is I was very prejudiced against it. Because I think the way I did is the only way to do it. And I got to have a new experience. I have the most amazing life that you all gave me. And I can't thank you enough. And I want to tell you, because I am capable of love, which I was not, I really do love you. I really do, and I hope you can feel it, because that same listening device that I have that connects me with God, no matter what I call this creator, connects me with you. And if you'll open it up, you'll feel that I really do love you. And if you open it up when you talk to God, you'll feel that too, no matter how prejudiced against God you are. The creator, the greatness, whatever, I don't care. Because we don't have to have the right name. God knows who God is. We just got to try. Thanks for having me.